Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar about Dynamic Web and MVC and Web API. This is almost the same presentation as the one I gave at the Dynamic Web Technical Conference, and I hope you all can see what's going on in the screen. We had a little problems before, but I hope it's fixed now, but otherwise you should say something. Okay. My name is Klaus Martens and I'm an architect at Dynamic Web. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit why we are using MVC, and then I'm going to present you a roadmap for what we already put in Dynamic Web regarding to MVC and what's coming in the next versions. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you make a front-end controller, and I'm going to show you some code so you can do it yourself. And then I'm going to show you how to use Web API and how to make a service there. And then in the end I'm going to show you something new, that you can use MVC to create backend areas and controllers. So why MVC? Well, first of all, it's by popular demand. There's a lot of people using MVC out there, and less and less people are using web forms, and we are starting MVC just to give you the opportunity to have another programming paradigm, but also because we want to use it ourselves in the backend of Dynamic Web. It's also because we have a strong commitment to the ASP.NET stack. We've been using Microsoft technologies for, ever since we started Dynamic Web, and this is just a continuation of that strategy. We also want to preserve you an alternative development paradigm in the front end and in the back end. And then we also see this in the long term as an opportunity to turn Dynamic Web into a service-based like architecture, meaning that we're going to change the way that API works in Dynamic Web, but we're not going to do it right away. We're going to do it over a long period of time, and it means that you're going to see things like services, dependency injections, more thinner models, not the fat API we're using today. We're going to change that, but we're going to do it little by little. Okay, if we go back to version 8.3 of Dynamic Web, we had some problems. You couldn't really run MVC. We was blocking the routing of ASP.NET, and well, you could do it, but you had to use some hacking to get that work. You had to actually just jump over some of our code because we were interfering with the things you wanted to do. We also have Razor, but it's not Razor in the sense that you know when you're using MVC and making views. It's still the right Razor, but we are, because we're using the old template engine 2, you were presented with a list of tags and not really models as you're used to in MVC. In 8.4, we fixed that problem with the blocking of the routing, and we also added NuGet support, and that was because that we had some dependency problems. We had assemblies that was dependent on other assemblies, and the only way to get around this was really to add NuGet, and it's also for your benefit, because then when you're making a custom solution and using NuGet package, you're sure the versions are right, because we're also using that, so you don't get a external assembly somewhere that you have to refer to. We also upgrade Dynamic Web to ASP.NET 4.5.1, and that was to get. It was because we want to get all the features of MVC.NET Web and also MVC.NET 5 and Web API 2. If we're looking at what's coming in in a short month, in about 3 weeks. In the next version, 8.4.1, we're gonna support that you can build your own backend areas. It simply means you can go in the backend and access your own controllers and your own user interface. Then we support that you can not only put views in the views folder or in the areas folder like you would do normally when you create a MVC application, but also you can use /files in Dynamicweb to put them in. And this is useful if you have like common projects where you want to have a standard set of views and then maybe overriding in a custom solution, for example. We are going to give you a MVC project template, which is basically almost the same as the one you have today, and when you're making a custom solution, except that we added the MVC.NET assemblies and we changed a little bit in web.config and global ASICs, so you are able to set up routes and view engines and stuff like that. And then we're going to give you some attributes that so you can control authentication, especially in backend, so you're sure that people cannot access your control without being logged into the backend. If we look a little more ahead, the version that's coming, Ultimo August, we're going to use things like dependency injections. We are already starting using that internally right now in Dynamicweb. And we will probably present you some kind of IOC controller that you can add your services to and access the services again. And this is a kind of replacement for the extensibility API, but it's not a total replacement. We will still use the extensibility API that you know. Then we will support Web API in a more larger scale than we do today. You have a little support now, and I will show you how to make a Web API controller and access that service, but we will extend that support. And then we'll start to use models. As I said before, we're using tags right now, and we will more and more start to use models as transporting data around to your views. And this is not something that where we're just going to give you a lot of models right away. We're going to start in the small, and then we're going to extend that in the coming years with all the data we have, I think. But we don't really have a plan on which model we're going to give you first or which one comes later. It will happen organically as we refactoring our code and develop new features. And then we'll also present a Web API client for iOS. It's just a very thin client that just makes it possible for you to hook up with dynamic web installation and get data to your iPhone or iPad application. If we look a little more ahead, after the summer, we'll start to converting the front end to MVC, and that doesn't mean that you're going to use MVC to create front end. You're going to make controllers, but the engine that we use to render templates and getting data from modules, we will probably convert that to MVC because it makes sense, and it makes sense for us that we're using the same routing engine as the controllers that you make yourself. And that I already talked a little bit like that. We're going to extend, we're going to replace tags with models, or we're going to do both. But this is something we will work on after 8.5. Continue to extend the support for making MVC controls in the backend. And then whatever comes from you, requests, extension to Visual Studio, stuff like that. And then hopefully we will take the items of Dynamic Web and make it best friends with MVC. And that's because there is many parallels between items and models in MVC, and it makes sense to make a coupling between those two. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, or let's code a little bit. Like I said before, we will present you with a custom solution template. I'm not going to use that today, but it will be available sometime after 8.4.1 is released. We modified web.config and global ASACs and this is really the major change in compared to the custom solution that you're using today. And this I already talked about. The custom solution would also give you just the standard MVC folders and files that you know from a standard Visual Studio MVC project. And yes, you'll still need to copy the admin folder in and to get access to the administration. There's nothing changed there. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a new controller. And maybe I should show you something first here in the admin. I prepared a little bit in the admin, and this is mostly about items. As you see here, I got a page called Guestbook, and if you were at the conference, you saw this guestbook being used as a sample all over the conference, and I'm also using it, but with a little twist, because I'm setting up this page called Guestbook, and if I go into the properties, you'll see that I put in an exact URL and call it /guestbook. And this is just so I have the guestbook page in the navigation along with all the other pages you have published in Dynamic Web. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new class, and then I'm going to put in some models because we need some data to start with. I'm going to call it guestbook models. And then I prepared some code. Sorry. So what you have here is actually a code first item type definition. Instead of setting it up inside Dynamic Web or making an XML file, you can also declare item types by code. We call it code first, and the way you do it is you create some tags, and I'm not going to get into that really because this is covered by other sessions, but it's just to tell you what I've done. We have two item types here called guestbook and guestbook entry, and then down here I have it's actually a view model. I'm putting the two other item types together so I can get a view with all the data I need, and then I can use that later in a view or in a controller. Save this, and then I'm going here and make a new controller. I'm going to call it guestbook controller. So, and then I'm gonna add a few methods here. I'm going to add an index method, and I need some using declarations. So this code is doing is it's simply getting a guest book and some entries from the page I declared in my administration. If you look here, you can see there are some sub pages declared here. Never mind the name. It's just because I chose to put my name there as the title of the page. See, now it's complaining about that I need a page ID, and let me show you what this is all about. First I'm going to paste this in, and it gives me a page ID from the root data. That doesn't come by itself, so I have to go in and I have to declare a new root for this controller. We do that. See it here. So what it does is it's creating a new root called guestbook default, and it's putting it in the path that I showed you before in the administration, and say, so every time there's something calling /guestbook, you should use this guestbook controller, and if no action is defined, use the index action as default. But over here you can see there is a page ID equals 1067, and this is exactly the same page ID as this page have. You can see it up here when I mouse over the page. So what's really going to happen when there's a request coming in, it's going to find the right controller, it's going to find the right action, and it's going to put the page ID in the root data and bring that along to the controller. So if I go back to my guestbook controller, you can see here, this is really what I'm doing here. I'm making a property and then accessing the root data. And that makes it possible for me to ask the item manager and say, give me the item which is located at the page, and it's a guestbook item, and I can use strongly typed strong types here because I didn't declare it as an item type in XML. I actually declare it as in code, so I have a real class I can access here. So what it does is give me the guestbook here with that page ID, and then give me the sub pages that is actually a guestbook entry from the same page, and this is really the sub pages that you saw before. And then mesh this up in the view model I showed you before, guestbook with entries, and then return the values. But right now we have a controller, we have a root set up, we are bringing the page ID with us, but we need something to show, so I'm going to create a few views here. And it's going on down here. When I create a controller, it created a guestbook folder, and I can just put in a few views. But I want a few methods first. Here's a create method, which is basically just asking for the create view and to show that. And then down here I have the same create method, but in a post version. So the first time when I just come in with a get, it will hit this action and show the create view, and if I'm coming in and making a post request instead, it will run this code, which is basically code that finds the right page and saves a new guestbook entry into this page as a new subpage, and then it's going to redirect back to guestbook. So let me continue creating the views here. Let's call it, need one called index first. And then another one called create. I'm just gonna cheat a little bit and paste in some code I already prepared. Here was the index. And here comes the create. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, let's start with the create. What it does is really it's displaying a form, and with the controls for entering a new guestbook entry. And when I submit that, it will hit the create action in my controller and hopefully save a new item with that data. In the index view, I'm pretty much just going to iterate through the guestbook entries and show them. And then I have some code to show a gravatar, which is made by helper functions here. And this is just normal MVC helper functions. Okay, I'm going to try to compile that to build it. And then I'm going to So we got a menu item here called guestbook, and hopefully it will show the guestbook entries. Now I already created some, but we can try to create a new one. Call it and then try to. Yep. Sorry about that. It happens sometimes the first time, and it's a little error we have. I can't tell you exactly what's going on, but the very first time I create a form, sometimes it does that. We are trying to fix that problem, but for now I think it still works. I think we still got a new item here. Let me check. It didn't sound like that. Yeah. So there was an error message, but it actually worked behind that. We're working on fixing that error, and for hopefully before we will release this next month. So this is really how you create a front-end controller. It's exactly the same as you would do normally in MVC, except that you have to make like a shadow page in Dynamicweb, and this is the way this is what I did here, and now it's coming the last one. And the way I did it was just to go in here and then enter an absolute path, and then make my root the same over here as /guestbook. So this is how you make a front-end controller. I'm going to show you how to make a API controller, a web API. So if you want to publish some data as a web service in JSON or XML, you're able to do that. And then you're going to do, you can do it like this. You create a new web API controller. Let's call it guestbook API controller. We're not really needing all this. The only thing we need here is a get method. And that's all you need on the controller side to publish data. But you also need to set up a route for this service. Now, normally the way you would do that in MVC is something like that. Pretty much the same as the route you're making in the MVC controller, but just with a different path. But there's a problem here because items are dependent on HTTP session. It requires that you have an HTTP context and that has a session that you can access. But since web services and web API services are stateless, meaning that they should not access sessions because of the overhead, the session property of HTTP context will actually be null. So in order to fix that problem, we made a new kind of a new way of declaring a route, and this is almost exactly the same, except that you add this property here and say my route handler should be session route handler. And what it does is really, if you ever made an IHTTP module, you know you can put an attribute on it, or you can implement an interface called session state, or I require session, or something like that. And this is really what we're doing. So instead of using the normal route handler, we're just using this, and then session will work out of the box. This is not a perfect solution, but we are very hard trying to remove the dependencies we have on IHTTP context and in the code. So when you're accessing an item or creating items, you don't really need the session. You do that right now, and we'll fix that, and then you no longer need this session route handler. You can just use routes like you would normally do when you make a web API controller. So I'll try to compile that, and then I'm going to start my command prompt. Let's just wake this up a little bit. Try to, and then I'll try to access the source here. So I'm just using curl in a command line just to show you that it works. So let's try to run this code. Yeah, it worked, and you can see you get some JSON out here, which is the same as the post or the entries you saw here. You can also try to put a new HTTP header on and then say instead of JSON, accept XML. So you can do both. You can both do JSON and XML with Web API, and of course we support that too. The last thing I'm going to show you is what to do when you want to, for example, if you make a frontend controller and you want some way of administering the data in the backend. You're not really been able to do that before. You've been able to create add-ins and like extensions to the backend, for example, a discount module or a discount add-in for e-commerce, but you haven't really been able to build your own UI in the backend. And we're opening up that possibility right now. And the way you do it is, I prepared a little code here, and I created that as an area, MVC area, and I created a new area here called guestbook admin. I already made the controller, which is very basic. It's actually no code at all right now. Of course, you can put in your own code. I'm not going to really make anything useful here. I'm just going to show you how to get the UI up and running. So create a new controller, and for that controller you also need to have a root set up for that, and let's do that right away. I'm assuming that you're familiar with the registration, area registration in MVC. So what I'm doing here is really just basic stuff. Instead, I'm assigning this root to /admin/guestbook, and then some actions and data, and that should be enough to display. But when I'm in the admin, how would I access this page? I mean, I have really no way of putting in a URL, so I need some way to hook up the administration so it's aware about there's a new controller, and when I click here, it will present that. The way to do that is to create a new file here called guestbook admin. Oh, sorry. Guestbook admin shell registration. Really, the name is not really important like that. What's important here is what's inside, and it comes here. Paste that in. What I'm doing is I'm creating this class, and it inherits a class called shell registration, and by shell we mean like the outer shell of the administration, and this is just an interface we have so you can hook up your own services and user interface. It only contains a single method called register, and it takes a registration context. So what you do is really you're telling it, I have a new piece of UI and I want to register it in something called navigation management, and it's called guestbook, and you should use this image, and when you click at something, please go here to admin/guestbook, which was the root we assigned for our controller. So I'm gonna do another thing where I also need a view for my controller. Oh, sorry. Call it index. Okay. I'm going to start down here with layout. The way MVC work is that when it's looking up or when it's trying to render a view, it's starting with a file called view start, and that really just defines what layout you should use. And layout is something similar to master pages, but if we look inside the layout file, I just made you know, the outer content of the page, and then I'm rendering the individual views inside that. And this is just to make sure you have the right JavaScript, that you can access JavaScript and style sheets and initializing Bootstrap and jQuery and things like that. It's not really really difficult. It's just to take this and then copy it to whatever you're going to use it for. And if we look at the index file, what I'm doing here is I'm using something called Dynamicweb ASP.NET Helpers, which defines APIs for creating the toolbars and tool buttons and stuff like that in the administration. So I can do that now. I can say begin a new toolbar, create a tool button, make some space, create another tool button, and then display a subtitle. I'm gonna build that. And then let's try to reboot the administration. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is going into the management center, and then I'm going to expand the system tree node here, and you can see there's a new menu item here called guestbook, and when I click that, we got a view over here with nice buttons and a little head, and of course nothing will happen when I click because we didn't actually make it do something, just displaying the buttons. And this makes it possible for you to make your own administration plugins for the Dynamicweb admin. That was pretty much all I had to show you today. If you have any questions, you should maybe try to write them now, and I'll try to answer them as good as I can. I can see some of you writing that you had problems seeing what I was presenting. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully when we save the video later and then you can watch it again and see the things you didn't see today. I'm sorry about that. Somebody wants me to resize the project solution. I can do that. Okay, I'm going to try to answer some of the questions you have. There's one here says, will we be able to use everything from NuGet in our DV projects? The short answer is yes, except if there's something specific in that NuGet control that makes it impossible. We don't have any restriction on what kind of packages you can use or import, but of course there are some NuGet packages that install things when you import them, and they might do something that we don't like. It's I can't predict that, but in the short answer is yes, you will be able to use all NuGet packages. And there's another question: how and where do you apply the control? I'm not sure I'm exactly sure what control you're referring to, so maybe you could try to in the front end. I'm still not quite sure what you mean with the control. You mean the controller or no? Okay, yeah. I'm not really applying anything. What I did before was I was in the administration. I created a normal page. Let's go back here. Called guestbook. And then if I take properties here, sorry, it's in Danish. I forgot to switch to English. The exact URL for this page, I'm specifying it should be /guestbook, and that's pretty much all I'm doing. Because when I set up the root in MVC, it will just override whatever Dynamicweb decided that should go on that URL. So we just take over the routing, or MVC takes over the routing. Whatever route you define will win over what Dynamicweb tried to do. So this is how it's possible. All the page, it should be all the page. No one's asking if it's just a paragraph I'm talking about, or if it's the whole page. It's the page I'm talking about. It should have some kind of URL, and paragraphs don't really have URL, so it should be the page. I hope that's enough, or that answer your question. No. Okay, thank you. See if there's other questions here. Okay, I think the rest of it was about the size of the presentation. Okay, another question from Jeppe. Yeah, Jeppe is asking about authentication. And it works like this, that if you're using the backend, we will provide an attribute for you. I didn't show you in this presentation, but we'll have a new attribute, so you can say this is an administration controller, and it will make sure that you're logged in before you can access that controller. Or if you're not logged in, it will redirect you to the login page for the administration. In the front end, it's a little more difficult. We don't really have anything that hooks up with the authentication we have, but of course it will work. So if you're already logged in and you have a session, and that session have a DV username and stuff like that, you will be able to access that because it's just a normal session. But you will have to, if you have a page that is, let's say, protected by that, you can only access it in when you're logged in. You'll have to do that yourself right now. Did that answer your question, Jeppe? Okay, other questions? It doesn't seem like there's any more questions. I'm going to give it 30 seconds more if somebody's writing a question right now. Now it doesn't look like there's any more questions. So I'm going to say thank you for today, and I will try to put this out, and hopefully you will be able to see everything and not just a part of the screen in that. My email is My email is Klaus at KMA at, maybe I can write it here. That's my email. Better put it up in the corner so you can read it. You're welcome. Okay, if there's nothing more, or if there's not any more questions, I will say thank you for today. See you next time. Bye bye.